Hello everyone, I'd like to call the meeting to order this evening. My name is Mike Flatley, I'm the CEO of the Royal Society of Victoria. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to our lovely old building this evening. We are holding this meeting in 3 different places at once. Yes, here in this room, but also via Zoom. Thank you to everyone who's joined the Zoom webinar as well, and as we attempt to do our hybridised meetings, and also via YouTube. So we have 3 audiences to manage tonight as well. And I welcome all contributions via comment in Zoom and on YouTube as well. We will try to get to all questions tonight, but we also have a fabulous panel discussion to enjoy this evening as well with Rob Gell, Bronwyn Fox, and also Amanda Caples, Victoria's lead scientist, who'll be joining us shortly. I'm not chairing the first part of tonight. That particular duty falls to our president, Rob Gell. Rob is a coastal geomorphologist by training. However, his life has taken him in interesting places. He is, I guess, an entrepreneur in an environmental sense, in a technological sense, and in a social sense. There's nothing you're not doing, Rob, so I'd like to welcome Rob to the podium to take us through this evening. Please make him welcome.
Thank you, Mike. And indeed, I do sometimes call myself an environmental entrepreneur because no one else seems to want to be one of those. So, but it's good fun. And a couple of weeks ago, I got called a venture capitalist. I thought, well, possibly. But anyway, it's a good space to be in at my age when you're playing around with the technology that we need to be investing in. So may I welcome you all as well. And as Mike said, we're working in 3 formats tonight, here in the Ellery Theatre of the Royal Society of Victoria, via Zoom and also via YouTube. Before we begin, though, in the spirit of reconciliation, we do acknowledge that all of us are located on the traditional lands of our continent's first scientists, the traditional lands of the Woiwurrung Wurundjeri people in this case, who represent the diverse lands and waters of what we now call Australia. We do welcome our comments, as Mike said, on Zoom, the chat function there, and also through the live stream on the comment section of YouTube as well. And for those people who are online, we invite you please to use those functions to acknowledge the traditional land that you are joining us from this evening. A very warm welcome to everybody, and particularly to the members of the Victorian Division of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering, with whom we are running this joint presentation tonight. And in particular tonight, we welcome Professor Bronwyn Fox for her presentation, Creating a World-Leading Manufacturing Sector in Victoria. And I'm sure many people welcome even the notion of discussing manufacturing again in Victoria, let alone Australia. Bronwyn is Chief Scientist of CSIRO, Australia's National Science Agency and Innovation Catalyst. She joined CSIRO quite recently in October last year and is CSIRO's 4th female chief scientist. She's known globally as a leader in advanced manufacturing, material science and Industry 4.0 technologies, and passionate about bringing together multidisciplinary teams for collaborative research. She was formerly Deputy Vice-Chancellor Research and Enterprise at Swinburne University of Technology and founding director of Swinburne's Manufacturing Futures Research Institute. During that time, she established a world-first Industry 4.0 test lab for the additive manufacturing of carbon fibre composites in collaboration with CSIRO. And earlier, she was a co-founder of the Carbon Nexus facility at Deakin University. In 2018, she was awarded the Global Congress on Manufacturing and Management Research Leadership Award. And then in 2020, of all things, the Royal Society of Victoria's Medal for Excellence in Scientific Research. Bronwyn, welcome back to the Society. Would you please join me for a minute for your presentation? And I guess the first question we should ask you is, how's the new gig? How are you getting on at CSIRO?
I absolutely love the new gig, and for those of you who don't know me, I actually started my working life and my career at CSIRO in the early 90s, and my new office is just a couple of 100 metres from my first lab. So there's kind of a lovely feeling of coming home, but I just can't believe how much CSIRO's changed in that intervening time. And, you know, I probably may not have come back had it not been for Larry Marshall's leadership. He's really moved the National Science Agency into a much more innovative, creative space. And I'm really excited to see, and I'll talk about tonight, some of the spin-outs from CSIRO that have been created recently.
Now, the other question, and I don't want to delve too much into politics, but there's been a change of government. CSIRO has had some dilemmas over the last decade or so with funding changes. Is there an enthusiastic spirit at CSIRO that you've noticed since October?
Well, we're not really sure. We obviously work with both sides of politics and we're there to implement policy. We're really excited about some of the initiatives for CSIRO to work with the university sector, and I'll talk a little bit about that tonight too. So I think it's too early to say, but...
We can back it. There may be some questions for you on that later.
Okay.
There'll be time at our panel. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bronwyn again for a presentation on Manufacturing Victoria.
Thank you so much. It is really lovely to be here and to be here with other human beings, as well as all of those joining us online. I'd like to begin by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and also to acknowledge that it is in fact NAIDOC Week. Now, one of the other roles that I have is to serve on the board of Museums Victoria. And if you haven't been there recently, go back and check out the museum. First of all, it has the most intact skeleton of a Triceratops globally that has just arrived. So go and have a look at that. It is really spectacular. And the other spectacular thing I'd really encourage you to do is to spend some time in the First Peoples Gallery. And I learnt so much. I was there last Friday and learnt so much about the care that the longest continuous living culture in the world has had for our nation and our country, and learnt a lot about sustainability from just my short time in that gallery. And it was wonderful to hear the stories about how the philosophy of our Indigenous people in never taking more than you need. So, for example, if you found a nest with one swan's egg, you wouldn't take it. You would wait and you would come back and you would try and find a nest that had 2 eggs from a swan, and then you would only take 1. So you never take more than you need. You always leave things to grow. And I think there's just so much we can learn about sustainability from our Indigenous people and our first scientists. So I'm going to talk a little bit about manufacturing today, but what I'm really going to talk about is how we make the most of learning between the intersections of disciplines. And that's one of the great privileges of my new job, is looking across the whole of the scientific community in CSIRO and understanding where we can make the most of those intersections and where we can learn, and I'm going to talk tonight about where we can learn from the mining sector and what we can apply to the manufacturing sector. So first of all, a little bit about CSIRO. It may surprise you to know that we are actually one of the world's largest multidisciplinary science organisations, and we have more than 5,200 staff, but we have many, many more affiliates who are there part-time and working in other organisations, many with the university sector. We have really state-of-the-art national research infrastructure that is available for everyone. And we delivered more than $7.6 billion of benefit to the nation in the financial year ending in 2021. Now, one of the things I always do before I move organisations is look at the values of the organisation. And these values absolutely resonated with me. People first. We're not actually in the science business at CSIRO, we're in the people business, because without people, we can't activate our science, we can't get it out into the real world. Further together, how do we partner, how do we work together both nationally and internationally to advance the benefit of Australia? Making it real, it's great to do thought experiments, but how do we get that out into the real world? And trusted, it's so important that CSIRO is a trusted advisor and that we're seen as a trusted source of impartial advice. And one of the things that has really struck me in joining CSIRO is the strong sense of purpose that everyone feels in being part of this organisation. And our purpose is to solve the greatest challenges through innovative science and technology. Now, we identified 6 challenges as areas of the greatest importance to Australians, and we solve these challenges through a range of different portfolios, including our missions program and our future science platforms, as well as the core work that's being done in our business units. So together we are looking at how we can drive Australia's recovery and resilience following the recent national crisis that we've had. And these 6 challenges are, of course, health and wellbeing, food security and quality, a secure Australia and region, resilient and valuable environments, sustainable energy and resources. And the thing I'm most interested in at the moment is how can we catalyse the creation of the industries of the future that will lead to further economic benefit and create jobs. So many people ask me what a chief scientist actually does, and here is the strategy on a page. I obviously am the chief cheerleader for all of our scientists and all of our science and across all of it, but you have to focus on something. And so these are the initial areas of focus that we will be looking at in order to make sure that we can really make sure we have critical mass around these areas. So digitalisation, quantum technologies and energy and climate. In quantum technologies, we've just recently launched our Future Science platform, and you will have seen some really exciting announcements about breakthroughs from Australian scientists in quantum technologies. It's a really interesting environment with many startups around Australia, forming many startups internationally. And so there's some great opportunities, and I'm working really closely with both Amanda Caples and Kathy Foley. Oh, hi, Amanda, on what this looks like for Australia and where we can really derive benefit, where we can make an impact and where we can have a global benefit. So the 4 key initiatives that we're focused on are aligned with our 4 values. People first is impossible without you. You may have seen some of our campaign. We are recruiting 200 early and mid-career researchers. We're committed to investing in the future, attracting those leaders for the future and making sure that they are supported and nurtured as they join CSIRO. So that's really exciting. And I love this because when I joined CSIRO in the early 90s, it was the beginning of the CRC program, and there was an influx of really young talent. And I think back to that time, not only did we have a lot of fun, but we hung out together and we played sport together, and we just developed a community. But some of the technology that was invented at that time has had such longevity. I'm thinking of extended wear contact lenses, raft polymerization, the dendrimers that then became Starpharma were all from that time. So it'd be lovely to capture a little bit of that and recreate it. Further together are partnerships, and Indigenous partnerships are incredibly important to us. We've just launched our 3rd Reconciliation Action Plan. We are in the process of developing our Indigenous science and engagement strategy, and university partnerships have never been more important. And as someone who's come from the university sector and joined CSIRO, and for that 30 years since I left, in the 90s, I have partnered with CSIRO for that whole time. My PhD supervisor was from CSIRO. I got to Deakin, found there was, I didn't have the infrastructure I needed. CSIRO came to the rescue. And then at Swinburne, we had a great partnership with CSIRO. I really want to make sure that every university has the access to CSIRO that they need and can see the benefits of that wonderful partnership in the same way that I did. Then making it real is Labs of the Future. We've done a lot of thinking, a lot of horizon scanning, a lot of really understanding what the models are for science in the future. And we've looked at things like the Carnegie Mellon Cloud Lab, where you can have cloud access to a chemical laboratory and remotely access hazardous complex chemical reactions. And we're now applying that to our own environment. So there'll be more to share about that in the next year or so. And then finally, the refresh of the Future Science and Technology Plan. The previous plan was led by Kathy Foley and launched in 2019. It identified quantum technologies as the area for future investment. So this will be really looking at horizon scanning. So what are the next future science platforms we need to be investing in now so that Australia's at the cutting edge in the next 20 to 30 years? And I'm just going to grab a glass of water. Thanks. So I'm going to bookend this presentation with a reference to some work I was involved in for ACOLA on the Internet of Things and a 10-year horizon scanning report on the Internet of Things. And this is an incredibly important enabler for both manufacturing and the mining sector. So in this report, which was wonderful because it brought together fellows from all of the different learned academies. So we had social scientists working with deep tech experts, and it was just a really wonderful process. And because of that diversity in the team and that mixture of disciplines, we really highlighted and found some really interesting findings that we wouldn't have otherwise discovered. So in that, we identified a number of trends, and I'll come back to where they are. So keep in mind that this report was launched in 2020, and the world has moved on considerably since then. So the three things that I found really interesting was the emergence of digital twins as something that would have a value in and of itself. So how can I simulate my manufacturing process or my mining process using digitalization? How can I do predictive maintenance? How can I predict when a machine is going to fail? How can I commission something in the virtual world before I do it in the physical world so that I can save time and materials? Digital twins was one really interesting feature of that. The second thing that came up was sustainability in supply chains. So at the time, we found that global OEMs such as Mercedes were deciding who was in their supply chain, not just on the basis of cost, but on the basis of those companies being able to measure, track and monitor their carbon footprint. And whilst that was looking at life cycle analysis and historical data, there was a movement that would be IoT enabled and rely on real-time updated information from live manufacturing processes. So that to me highlighted a bit of a risk for Australia that we could be cut out of those global manufacturing supply chains if we weren't able to demonstrate we could measure, track and monitor carbon emissions from anything we manufactured. And the third interesting thing was the emergence of data spaces and data marketplaces. And that's something I'll update on at the end. But at the time, there was the initiation of a movement called Gaia-X, which was at the time a handshake deal between France and Germany. And it's now a really robust organization, which brings together all of the cloud providers under the same umbrella with a uniform way of working. And not only did it look at how to create data spaces around aerospace. So for example, Boeing and Airbus are both partners of Gaia-X, but how to create data exchange marketplaces where you might be able to see that I have the manufacturing process for particularly delicious type of gin. Okay, so, and I'm using a particular blend of botanicals to do that. I've got really great temperature control over my distillation column, and you can see that that's available, and then you can subscribe to that data so you can replicate that manufacturing process. So this is still an emerging area in Europe, but the overall trends were that rather than it being a single provider, there was decentralization and distributed networks. There was a movement away from cybersecurity and protecting my data to a framework of digital trust creation. So how can I share my data in a trusted way? And then standards we really use to drive and support tech innovation and interoperability. And data is an asset. So data in and of itself is now an asset. So now I'll talk about our work in mining and how that relates to IoT. And I'd like to acknowledge the contribution of my colleague, Jonathan Law, who heads up growth and used to head up the CSIRO mining business unit, because he's just been a phenomenal source of information. So CSIRO mining research has set out to create a new suite of technologies to change the way we think about time and space. Now, that sounds very Doctor Who, but it's actually very pragmatic. And if you think about the mining process, mining is really about the selective extraction of very valuable materials from waste, from rocks. And that material, the raw material, is inherently variable. So how do you deal with that variability? How do you measure the concentration of the valuable material that you really want to extract? And how do you do that in a cost-effective and efficient way? Now, the connection between mining and manufacturing really came from that ACOLA report, and was something that Alan Finkel picked up on, because he said, our mining sector is so incredibly globally competitive, even when we have salary costs that are about 2.5 times the rate of other sectors. And in addition to that, underwent a peer review process. And one of those reviewers was Professor Genevieve Bell from ANU, who, by the way, is giving the next ATSI talk on the 11th of August. Please be there. Who had just come back from a mission to the Pilbara, and she was just so overwhelmed with the speed, the rate, the level of automation at which those mining companies were able to operate, that, she said there's got to be some takeaways that we can bring back to manufacturing. So at CSIRO, we've worked very discreetly with the mining sector to develop these world-leading technologies. And now I'm really keen to make that link to manufacturing and how we can implement it. So some of the outcomes have been real-time measurement of metal concentrations, that enable selective mining. So you're creating less waste, you're focusing on the material that's useful and usable rather than the waste material. And then efficiency dividends that lead to reduced water waste, reduced reagents usage, and they really transform the economics of mining. So here are 3 examples that I'll talk about. The first one is our magnetic resonance technology for detecting ore grades at high volumes that uses intelligent ore diversion. That has been licensed to Nextdoor. The other one that I'm really interested in particular is VoxelNet, which is a machine learning artificial intelligence technology that helps drones navigate through mine sites, for example. So it really helps with that, the notion of space and how you understand space. Now, for me, there is such a great link here to advanced air mobility, which is, a really hot and emerging field, and a natural for Australia where we have wide open spaces between cities. So these artificial intelligence control systems for navigating uncertain environments are going to be really important for the future. And then finally, Chrysos is the third example, and Chrysos was recently listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. It is the new gold standard for the gold standard. So in order to measure the concentration of gold from your rocks, it would take a fire assay with nasty reagents and about 2 weeks. This is an inline process that uses a photon assay, and it has just been commercialized, so stay tuned. It's very exciting technology, but again, uses that IoT concept of how do I measure inline, in real time, and then capture that data to give me better process efficiency and better control of my product. I'm going to talk quickly about the manufacturing business unit, and then I'll get on to one example of digitalization. So the benefit of our manufacturing business unit is that we're able to bring different disciplines together. And you can see we're working across a range of different areas, and there is really world-class infrastructure there. So some of the new investments that are being made are at that intersection of manufacturing and digitalization in a joint investment between Data61 and the manufacturing business unit. Quantum technologies and quantum batteries is definitely an area of interest. And the work that the group has been doing on vaccines and pharmaceuticals is just phenomenal. And very soon, I've had a peek through the window, but I haven't been inside, you'll be able to see our advanced biologics facility. So CSIRO was really instrumental in the rapid scale up of the initial vaccine candidates that were created in Queensland. We're currently working with the Doherty to scale up, and that is a wonderful role for CSIRO to play, where we can de-risk and scale and work at that pilot scale to get research out of the labs and into the real world. So there'll be much more to share about this very soon. So now I'll talk a little bit about a facility that I was involved in my past when I was at Swinburne that was a joint CSIRO facility. And this became yet another story of when CSIRO came to the rescue for me personally, because we conceived this, we worked with industry, we co-designed, co-created it, and we worked with CSIRO's teams as well as industry, and it was designed for industry. It's a 3D printing process for carbon fibre composites that is a world first. It's really unique. And when we initially conceived it, it was tiny and we thought we could fit it in the Hawthorn campus at Swinburne. It grew, it became at that pilot scale. We had nowhere to put it, and CSIRO came to the rescue. And Marcus Zipper personally came to the rescue when we were trying to construct the building and the facility, and the pandemic hit, and the building industry was likely to be shut down. So I'm eternally grateful to Marcus. So this, I'll show you a video of it at the moment, but it's not just about the physical material, it's about the digital systems that control the manufacturing process. And Siemens was such a phenomenal partner in designing and developing this, and they continue to work with us to push the boundaries further using MindSphere to control the process. And so the input is tapes of a carbon fibre material with a polymer to bind it together. The part can be digitally designed and the code can be sent to the machine, and these different movie reels then line up, and you'll see a very simple structure being made here. But we can create complex structures and we can create cutouts. And this process reduces the waste of manufacturing carbon fibre from 60% waste down to about 10% waste, because you can digitally control the manufacture of a near-net shape preform. Now, this is going at quite a slow speed, so you can see what's happening, and you can see when the pins are dropping, they're ultrasonically welding the layers together, but it can deposit a layer every 15 seconds. And this is the world's first of these multi-layer machines. The second machine has gone into a production environment in the United States, and it is really apparently pumping out parts, and we're partnered with them. So this is the first part of the process. The robot then transfers the two-dimensional preform into a press that creates a three-dimensional part and forms it. And then it's cured in a press. And I'll skip over this because I'd like to encourage you to come and see it. So unfortunately, this video isn't working, but the first part that we're demonstrating and making is this subscale satellite dish. And this is just a wonderful demonstration of what that ecosystem around our Clayton campus can do when we work together, because the center hub and the tooling has been 3D printed by Titomic, and they use CSIRO's cold spray technology. It brings together additive manufacturing of composites. And this satellite dish, it's like one of those vegetable strainers that we all used to use in the 1980s that fold up. You can deploy it and then it opens up like a flower. And these are pictures of the actual component and the design. So we can have someone from anywhere across the world sending us code to create any part, and we can send it to them. This is a picture of one of our students, Niels, and this was taken yesterday of that center hub. So they've created all of the different components and they're about to assemble it there, which is really wonderful. But the enabler for this was digital design, process monitoring using MindSphere, understanding material usage and where materials were running out so they could be automatically replenished. Now, I'd like to finish with an update about what we identified in the IoT Horizon Scanning report and where things are heading now. So Gaia-X has become a very well-funded, robust EU entity, and it's headquartered in Brussels. It is working with every company you can imagine, including fierce competitors, and bringing them together to create data spaces that are focused on a particular sector or a particular product. Catena-X is the automotive version of Gaia-X, and it brings together all of the major players in the automotive sector. And it's headquartered at my collaborators at Arena 2036 at the University of Stuttgart. So what's interesting there is they're starting to create those data marketplaces. They're really creating the enablers that will support the next generation of their technology. And if I can get this working, So this is the recently opened Factory 56. This is Daimler's green factory of the future. And here is where they translate all of the learnings from Arena 2036 and take them into a production environment. This is a digitalized, flexible factory floor that is able to create a Mercedes S-Class and then immediately move to the EQX, the new electric vehicle that Mercedes has launched. It's Wi-Fi and 5G enabled. One of the things I love about it is that you can even choose your shift and select when your shifts are in a digital world. So you can choose when you work. It's creating a new way of working. And I'm really excited about seeing this in the near future. And then one other thing that I mentioned was the movement to use materials smarter, less and longer. And recently in Nancy, there was a meeting of the World Materials Forum. I'd really encourage you to get onto their website. They did initiate an Australian chapter in 2019. They're looking to reinvigorate that. It's an incredible think tank that brings together all the thought leaders from industry. And it really is focused on how we can use materials smarter, less and longer. And one of the things that they are looking at are digital tools for measuring, tracking and monitoring carbon emissions and how we can make recyclable materials. I just want to share one slide with you that really stood out to me, which was you can download all of these papers from their website and have a look at them. But to me, this was really interesting, the periodic table of critical minerals and critical elements. And it wasn't what I expected. So this is some work that's been done by McKinsey, which really identifies which are the critical materials that are going to play a really important role in electrification and energy transition, and which have long-term uncertainties. So just encourage you to have a look at the papers on that website. So in order to be world leading, we need to understand what world's best is. And it's so important for us to collaborate internationally, but it's just as important for us to make those connections nationally. And I'd love to see, as much as we're keen to get trade missions back to Europe and back to the US, I'd love to see some manufacturing trade missions going to the Pilbara and to see what connections we can make there and what we can learn and how we can cross-fertilize technology. And you know, that example of mining to manufacturing is just one example. There are so many others there where we can make the most of those intersections. And then finally, the most important element to all of this is people. And, you know, really making sure that we're supporting that next generation of STEM, that we're working with schools, that we're working with and inspiring, you know, school students and really nurturing our next generation leaders. And this is my former group at Deakin University. I'm visiting the Carbon Revolution guys tomorrow, and I want to give them a shout out because their work is incredible. They are world leading in making one-piece carbon fibre wheels, and they're supplying them to Ford and Ferrari, and they're doing this from Geelong. And they started as, you know, just a few guys in a shearing shed. And so Tim Corbett and Aaron Brighton and Ash Denmead were all really instrumental, as well as Matt Dingle, who's just phenomenal and gone on to create many other companies. I'm meeting with Jake Dingle, the CEO, tomorrow. But thinking back, these guys all started out as that first cohort of students that we had working with Quickstep, who were a startup with this very rudimentary equipment that you see behind our group there. It's very rough and ready. And I really believe that working deeply with a startup actually changed their mindset about what's possible for them to do. And I'm really excited about CSIRO's role in industry-supported PhD scholarships, because that's where we can work with universities and the talented young people of today and really look at how we can do something distinct and different. And so it reminds me of, this is my secret passion, is punk rock. So there was a gig in Manchester in 1976 that only about 40 people turned up to. And it was one of the first gigs by the Sex Pistols. And it was memorable not for their lack of musical ability, but because nearly every one of those 40 people went on to form their own band. So from that gig came the Buzzcocks, you know, New Order, Joy Division, of course, and, you know, Simply Red all originated at this gig. And I just think that, you know, it's that punk rock ethos of, if they can do it, I can do it too. If there's anything that I would like to leave from my time in this role, it's how can we bring a little bit of that punk rock ethos to our science in Australia? I'll leave it there.
Bronwyn, fabulous, and one of my favourite topics also to end on, never mind the Buzzcocks. Fantastic. We're going to hear from a couple of other people tonight as well. We've got Amanda Caples, who's joining us this evening, and also Rob Gell. We have a lovely table over here for you both to come down and just jump into. I'm also going to take some questions from the audiences here in the. I need a volunteer firstly to work with the cordless microphone. Which has just eluded me. Is it Robert? Is that over there on the table? Yep, there it is. I know it's down there underneath the monitor. Could I have a volunteer from the audience, please? To be honest, Sid, thank you, my good man. Yeah, just put it in halfway along there, please, mate, and then it's sort of ready to go. Don't turn it all the way off, or it takes about 5 minutes to come back on again. Okay, so let's get started. Amanda, I'd like to hear your response to that first, because of course, you know, you and Bronwyn are working together, and this is about, you know, rolling out advanced manufacturing in Victoria, which I know is very close to your heart, and also the work that you do every day. Would you like to reflect first?
Yeah. Thanks, Mike, and thank you, Bronwyn, for a fantastic talk tonight, and love the way that it ended, because I agree with you. I was at the Gold Coast last week, and just seeing young people, and not so young people, because this was about enabling and expanding the horizons of researchers to undertake commercialisation activities. And it was just so enlivening, and people very much felt like they were empowered to undertake things that they hitherto thought were impossible. So empowering others is actually one of the great things about our respective jobs. So in terms of advanced manufacturing, and I love the carbon fibre story, and in fact, from a state government point of view, we have collaborated a lot with CSIRO over the past 20 years. And one of those collaborations has been around the carbon fibre foundry, effectively. That was a collaboration between, it was inspired by Bronwyn and her colleagues down at Deakin, who recruited CSIRO, recruited the Deakin University to commit to co-invest in that. And excuse me, and at that time we had Victoria's science agenda, and so it was a great economic development project where there was such a strong role and a great exemplar for government to invest in a facility that could be accessed by industry and researchers to grow a future industry. And I come back to it time and time again, as Bronwyn knows, to say that there is a great exemplar for how governments can work together, because the Commonwealth came in as well as CSIRO, universities, state. And what it's done is supported the development of Carbon Revolution and a range of other companies that have been able to do things and manufacture things that they would not otherwise have been able to do. So repeating that, finding the equivalent in 2020 is something that Bronwyn and Kathy Foley and I are, slowly working on, or maybe not so slowly working on, to see how we can replicate that.
Well, this thing too, like you're looking at what does spin out of that as well. We've got all of these industries who've had a chance to get their hands on all of the goodies and play with the toys and see what they can do. Is that spinning out into companies that have actually taken the same sort of equipment and out into their own facilities, and they're starting to work at scale, or are we still in sort of startup, find our way sort of mode?
We're servicing the world. And so what these facilities do is enable firms to grow sufficiently that they can then invest the capital themselves in terms of the next generation technology. So it's really giving a lift up to these industries, and we're now seeing future industries categories of new jobs, new applications of the technology
Yes.
that would not otherwise have occurred, or not certainly at the rate.
Excellent. Rob, I'll go to you. Now, I introduced Rob earlier as an entrepreneur in many different ways. One of the many ways in which Rob is an entrepreneur is working with the Internet of Things, sensing. There's a company called Attentus that Rob's a director of. Now, those are amazing things. They're out there in the environment, sensing absolutely everything you would want to understand about what is going on, situational awareness in the environment. Where did you get them manufactured?
Well, here actually, with a very, very smart instigator of the business, but really understanding where the need was. He originally worked in the water sector. Actually, he built those little flow restrictors on taps to save us water during the drought, and made some money, but then went to California, where there are lots of bushfires, and he was approached by a wealthy person who said, look, I've got a great big water tank here. I need to be able to empty it on my house when the next bushfire comes. And he said, presumably you don't want to be here to turn on the tap. So he had to think through all of he then put himself through an electronics degree.
Yes.
To work out how to do that and build all the, in his head, bring all the bits together. He even did a diploma in plastics to build the casing that will range from about 450 degrees centigrade to -50. So to house this unit that real-time sensors air quality and weather conditions and noise and vibration, and it's got video cameras and thermal detection things as well. So it was but he then brought in people to build specific components. He even then worked with the Austrians to work out, he's built a coating on the lenses of the external cameras so they don't get dirty.
Okay.
He did that with the Austrian army or something like that.
Yep.
It's about finding the people.
Yes. And he's found people all over the world,
Found
obviously.
people all over the world. Yeah. But manufactured in Cheltenham.
In Cheltenham. So when we're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about optics. We're talking about what are the other components?
Well, lots, all the boards inside are designed and built here by hand.
Yes.
And it's not an inexpensive unit, but there's nothing that does IoT at sort of freeway level data.
Yes.
It's high speed, big data.
Yes.
And world leading. And in fact, a company called Intuitive Machines found us. Intuitive Machines, some of you might know, are putting the lunar lander on the moon for NASA. And they said, you're doing that. This is the best gear in the world. And they actually rang us on a Saturday morning.
That's awesome.
Out of Texas. So, I mean, it's nice to have that sort of acknowledgement, but those good things can be done here.
Yes.
And we need to facilitate.
So the Internet of Things, that's something that came up early in your talk, Bronwyn. And you're talking about 2025, where we're looking at a distributed cloud rather than a centralized cloud. What that really sort of brought up for me is, one, awesome, but two, complex. And I think we've got a lot of engineers in the crowd tonight. With greater complexity comes, of course, many more points of failure and problems. To what extent do we have redundancy in such a system so that one part of it falls over or just gets very confused and knotty, that we can actually pick it up?
It is complex, and the other thing that's really complex is, I have colleagues who are working through all of these multiple partner agreements in how everyone will operate together and how competitors will operate together, and they're not at the point of data exchange at the moment, but they're kind of at the point of a transactional data sharing, which is interesting. I think the distributed framework actually, it means that we don't have that single point of failure. It means that we can have redundancies in the system much more. It does enable that safety net mechanism in a much more sort of well thought out way with the framework to support it.
But we have to, don't we? We have to have redundancies, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I'm thinking like we're just across the road from the Telstra Exchange here, right? So there's this massive hotel that's just been built across the road from the Royal Society of Victoria. You would have seen it all when you came in, right? There's twin towers with, a pair of pants between them with a nice sky bridge. The reason it didn't take up that entire block, which all used to be Telstra, is because the Telstra Exchange is right behind it, and and it may be scuttlebutt, but the urban legend goes that they could not sell their Telstra Exchange to that hotelier because they don't know how to put it back together again if they have to move it. It's so old now. It's been there for such a long time, and all the wires are just going everywhere. It works. Don't mess with it. Yeah, that's sort of really, and often it doesn't work, but they know how to put it back together. If they tried to start again, it's just too big an undertaking. They can't even go there until, of course, the whole system is redundant, which is not far off, obviously. So yeah, thinking about the Internet of Things and the way that we have to, I think, embrace Internet of Things, but in a way which is extremely logical. And in such a way that when it is inevitably supplanted by something else again, that we know where everything is plugged in, where where everything connects to each other. Is there a sense of, I guess, a centralized idea of how to organize the Internet of Things in such a way that's in this distributed sense? Because it seems very organic to me.
It's been evolving quite quickly in Europe with the Gaia X and Catena X, and so the risk is that if we don't get on board quickly, there'll be standards that are developed that we won't be aware of and we could be locked out of. And the Internet of Things, the most critical part in the Internet of Things is humans.
Yes.
It needs to serve us. So it's there for us. The other really critical part are sensors. And it's been really interesting to see sensor technology. Sensors are so much smaller, multifunctional, they're cheaper than they ever have been before. And the area that Amanda and I have both been interested in recently are quantum sensors and what they might help us deliver in the future.
Quantum sensing. Amanda, what's happening there?
Quite a bit,
Yeah.
actually. So it's an area that is not my domain expertise. So I rely on others who have that deeper knowledge.
Are there any experts in quantum engineering here tonight? No? Okay, everyone's shaking their head. Amanda, you're safe.
But at Swinburne, at RMIT, at University of Melbourne, at Monash University, we have an amazing network of quantum experts in sensing and computing, more on the software side for us. So everyone, I'm sure, in this room saw the announcement last week of Michelle Simmons with the fully integrated circuit that she's been able to achieve. So here in Victoria, we're looking at algorithms, so software and sensing. And it's been, for me as a pharmacologist, a great voyage of discovery to find all of these amazing people, physicists who are doing incredible work with, basically harnessing quantum mechanics to do things like sensing and quantum communications and material, simulating materials. And when you think about it, being able to better design chemicals as a consequence of having a clearer idea of the quantum mechanics of the atoms that that comprise the molecules. So it's a great field. It is advancing. Sensing is probably closer to reality. I was talking with Kathy about this, Kathy Foley, just yesterday to test, because I constantly test where is the technology readiness of some of these things, because it's very easy to get drawn in to a lot of the hype that occurs around technologies. But the consensus is that sensing is definitely at the here and now. And the good news for us here in Victoria is that we have world-leading capability at our institutions in this area. So we've got a real opportunity to accelerate that and bring it to reality.
Not just at our institutions.
Oh, well, we've got a quantum control engineer on our council at the moment. So
We do.
Very interesting. Yeah. Let's see if we've got a few questions in the audience. Has anyone got a burning query at this particular point? Please put your hand up. No, how are we going? Yes, we've got the Zoom. Sid, would you please furnish our Zoom operator with the microphone? Thank you.
We have a question from Jerry to Bronwyn. Last time manufacturing was successfully developed in the 1950s, the local producers were dependent on large corporations overseas. But then when tariffs were removed, the foreigners sort of left and small local companies kind of collapsed. So how can this time we develop a system that doesn't sort of rely on that so much, and it is more viable long term?
So, when the investment from the Victorian government in Carbon Nexus was started in Geelong, Geelong was going through a really challenging time. So, and I grew up in Geelong. I wasn't born there, so I can't say I was born and bred there, but I was definitely bred there, and went through, a pretty challenging time with the Pyramid Building Society crash, and saw that economic impact in Geelong in 1987. And, for me, there was a huge amount of fear when Alcoa were leaving, Ford were leaving, and Shell was up for sale without any prospective buyer at that point in time. And it was just really great and timely that the investment around and support of Carbon Revolution and Carbon Nexus came up at the same time as Ford were declining, and that, Carbon Revolution were able to grab onto those skills and capabilities. Since there's much more happening in Geelong than that. There's an amazing company called Formflow, which was founded by Matt Dingle, and Osteng have been the hidden champion behind a number of different innovations. So I'm seeing much more of that grassroots Australian-made ethos, the punk rock ethos, infiltrating our society. How can we make it ourselves, and how can we use digitalization to make sure we're making it more efficiently, more effectively, and decoupling the volumes of manufacture from the high salary costs that we had, so we can make more, create more jobs, but we can be more effective and more profitable from that manufacturing process.
Geelong's been a remarkable example, because Syrah had a materials lab there. The investment in the university has been spectacularly valuable, but they've also been able to even work with local government, but also with Cotton On and other industries there. And it's because the city's of that size, I think it's enabled the whole process really well.
And I'm actually heading there tomorrow. I can't wait. So on my bucket list for my whole life, I used to do work experience at Roman Haas and drive past the Australian Centre for Disease Preparedness every day. And I always wanted to see what's inside that mysterious building where we have our PC4, contained labs, where we were the first to take, a sample of the coronavirus and characterize it in those labs. And so tomorrow I'm going to get the chance to gown up, and I'll be hosed down at the end of it and decontaminated and actually see inside. But, that facility is so unique. And I was talking to one of the air control engineers down there. He said, we will never build a facility like this again, because the concrete in that structure was aged for 6 months before it was constructed. So there'd be no movement. It would be completely stable. And it's like a shell inside a shell. So it's very well controlled. And CSIRO will be expanding that and investing further in those facilities, which is super exciting, again, for the Geelong region, because it will bring talent and energy and a partnership with the local university again.
I was going to ask both Amanda and Bronwyn about the word that you used before about empowerment, which strikes me as a really important thing. Whether we talk about STEM in schools, it's about empowering people to think like this, even to the Sex Pistols. They empowered a room. And I think that's one of the things we need to learn. It's a bit like what the Royal Society endeavours to do, how we empower people to feel they can participate is really such an important thing for Australia to do. There's a lot of comparisons that come between the US and Australia, and particularly around the ability to fail. I think, like your bankruptcy, for example, that doesn't sort of preclude you from doing business ever again in your life in the States, for good or ill. But in Australia, we are far more risk averse, I think, because if you fail, you really fail. How could you perhaps reflect on that? How are we actually helping with the startup community? There's a lot of work that the Victorian government is doing around startups. How are we helping people to fail fast, which is often the mantra about startups, so that you can succeed more quickly?
Okay. So look, just at a individual level, and what I do with mentees is share with them that they don't you know, people don't need to know everything, you know. So I'm a pharmacologist and I'm looking at quantum. I've looked at I've looked at a range of different things. I'm not an expert in those areas. And so one of the most important and valuable pieces of advice that I receive, that I pass on to everyone, including startups and the like, is that no one expects you to know everything, and having that insight and being open to finding a friend and searching that advice and getting the best advice and
Yes.
testing it is really so important. And that's what all really good leaders do, is find the friends and have that team around them, that
People who want you to succeed. Yeah.
And then it's also, you know, I think the other thing, and it goes both to startups as well as, you know, all of us, is, you know, just that insight. And I said this to my mentee earlier this week, about the power of small wins. You know, there are days when, you know, you feel really, really great, even though it's just been an incremental move forward, but you've been moving forward. And I said, you know, certainly speaking from my own experience, when you haven't moved forward or you felt that you've moved back, feels really terrible. And, you know, and just recognizing that and finding strategies to deal with it.
Yes.
So those kind of, you know, approaches, and it's, you know, mindset, because it's all about mindset. To Bronwyn's point, that the audience in the Sex Pistols thought, well, if they can do it, so can I. And so a large part of our ability to get things done is the way that we approach it with mindset. So the many myriad of ways we can improve mindsets, I think, is important.
Yes. Yes. It's a resilience mindset, really, isn't it? Yeah. Bronwyn, would you like to respond to that?
Well, I'm really excited that CSIRO is reinvigorating our On Accelerator, because I've had many colleagues and many friends who've been through that program and come out of it just transformed. So that's an accelerator where we encourage the research community to get together and think about their ideas for commercialising a technology. And what often happens is that many of those, they're set up in teams and they work as a cohort. Many of those teams, their ideas don't actually progress and they fail. So what they do is they join other teams and they bring diversity of thought, they bring new ideas to those new teams. So but it brings in that spirit of, you know, that didn't work, so I'm just going to try something else. And that's a really important lesson from that program. So I'm really excited about that. I'm also really thrilled to have the chance to work with Main Sequence Ventures. And if you haven't had a chance to look at what they do, it's really phenomenal. I learn about their venture creation model, and when I was at Swinburne, and I started to talk to them about spinning out some technology. And since then, I've looked under the hood and I've seen, you know, so many of the technologies they've supported. They've supported a company called Quantum Brilliance. It's come out of ANU. They've supported V2 Foods, which some of you will have tried, the Rebel Whopper burger. That technology came from the CSIRO facility on food innovation and food manufacturing that uses plant protein to create a burger that tastes like a meat burger. So I think there's just so many different pieces that are supporting that spirit, that mindset that Amanda talked about, that it's going to be a really exciting time. And there's much more of that can-do attitude than ever before.
It's amazing. It's almost a time we can't really compare to another in many respects, isn't it? Sid, there's a question down the back from Milosh. While that's going down there, another quick question from me. And that's really, I guess, relating to that sense of uniqueness about what's happening right now, or the opportunity that's ahead of us right now. If we think about manufacturing from when, you know, people in this room were younger, certainly I reflected today on, you know, my first job when I got to Melbourne was in a factory, you know, summer job at high school, working for a clothing manufacturer in Carlton. You know, Carlton has no manufacturing in it anymore of that type, right? So that's unskilled labour at that stage. That's a year 10 student going to do some work over the summer. That's not really what we're talking about anymore when we're talking about manufacturing of the 21st century nature, or an industry 4.0 nature. So the skill level that's required to be a worker in this environment, are we keeping pace with our workforce? We've been talking about the young people that we're trying to bring back, you know, bring into the universities and then back out into the industry. Are we keeping pace? Is the growth of this industry keeping pace with the workforce that's available to make it grow?
Great question. Probably not.
Yeah.
So And AMSI, so the Australian Mathematical Sciences Institute, released earlier this year the number of our students taking advanced maths is declining at an alarming rate. And so certainly the proficiency in mathematics for both boys and girls, and it's extra dire for girls, is a real problem. And we do need to lift that and find ways of inspiring those individuals to pursue a career, which doesn't mean that they have to be mathematicians. But as you know, being an engineer or being an economist, I was talking to someone the other day, and of course, economics, you require advanced maths to do the modelling. So it's not just what we consider the physical sciences where you need a proficiency in that area. So we've got a lot of work to do in that area.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks, Mike, for this beautiful segue, because I wanted to ask something that relates to education of future scientists. And mentioning girls and boys and maths, I happen to be working my whole adult life in the world-leading system in maths and STEM education, which recently brought, for example, the only girl that won gold medal in International Mathematical Olympiad out of around 600 boys. There was a girl that won gold, which leads me to the following education. What is the funnel that various institutions around Australia, including CSIRO, including government, what is the funnel that they're creating to actually breed those young scientists and help them become big scientists? And I know that this has been a big issue also across Europe, where I was working in nuclear field, which was my field, where once those funnels were a bit cut off, it became a huge problem later on. So what are various institutions doing, including the Royal Society, of which I am part of partnership and outreach committee, so I have to say that I'm a bit biased. But each of your institutions, can you tell us what was the future of education here?
And that's very, you were working at Belgrade, is that right?
Yes.
Milos?
Yes,
Yeah, and that
yes.
was very much a mentorship, like each stage from secondary to tertiary through to PhD or industry. Everyone had a mentor all the way through.
Yes,
yeah?
it is actually a system that starts from primary school, where our members of Academy of Sciences, National Institute of Mathematics, Institute of Physics, or National Center for Physics, Nuclear Sciences, and so on and so forth. We work with students from young age, and then we have separate educational system within the state system. So it is a system of state schools,
Yes.
that work on a system that was created by scientists, not by the School of Education, not by, it is created by people who understand science, but that works perfectly. And then we work
Yes.
with British
Well, if
government.
you've got a school of ballet,
But we worked with British government, and they're developing now a couple of schools with top universities. They're trying to replicate, they want to create 17 schools of these, and they invested almost £1 billion to try to recreate them. It'll take a while.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay, well, let everyone have a chance to respond to that, I think. So who would like to go first?
I'll have a go first, just in terms of where I think, and it's my mantra now for the Royal Society of Victoria, that we need to rekindle this property. It's been here since 1854, to back, that's what it was like just before the gold rush, where it was a focal point for discussion of science. And I think, so we're now beginning programs working with lots of other science and tech-minded organisations to become affiliates of the Royal Society, to come and use this building, and so that we can sort of cross-fertilise our ideas. You can run into somebody in the corridor over a coffee. So anyone from Zoos Victoria want to do this, and the Environment Institute or the Vernier Society, whatever, all interested in actually utilising this space again in a collaborative way, so we can have the discussion that you're talking about, Milos. We actually have to, and I think it's a good role for the society, to be that sort of focal point where we can actually have a field of ideas, but to promote, and we're doing a lot of work in STEM, and Sid, our treasurer, with you at the back of the room, is in that business. But I think we need to cultivate a much stronger dialogue right across the state, frankly, and to promote science-based decision-making as strong as we can, because as Amanda says, we're not doing it very well yet. We need to get a whole lot better, because what we do know is when we when we do it, we actually achieve remarkably well. So we actually, there's real value for the state in making that investment. So that's perhaps the role the society might take.
Thanks, Rob, and agree totally. And I think the society has a really, really important role. So anything we can do to support you, let's talk. We probably don't have a lot of time, but let me just summarize. Part of the problem is that you've got there's multiple points of intervention. And so we need to encourage kindergarten, primary school students, and we find that typically they're curious and science and maths are not a problem at that early age. And then what happens as they go through their school years, this is where we get the divergence. And so we need multiple points of intervention: kinder, primary, secondary, tertiary, and then career. So there's not a magic bullet. There are multiple interventions that are needed at all those stages to both attract and to retain interest in these subjects. Then in terms of who's doing things, so first of all, let me start with a lot of non-government organisations. So there's a myriad of organisations, including ATSI, who are doing something in this space. So one of the first things I did when I came into the role was to start mapping that so that we could look at on one page and see who's doing what, so that we could prevent replication and duplication when it was not necessary, and to kind of join the dots, and that there was that visibility. So, and we've done a Women and Girls in STEM, a similar sort of idea to facilitate access to information on services that already exist. In terms of what the department is doing, I had a conversation with Education just last week. So they're developing new resources. So there are resources online that help teachers to teach science and maths, and some exciting ones will be released soon. And then we all know that one of the primary differences, or the intervention with the most impact, is around the teacher. And so there's been a program now for about 5 years on specialist primary maths and science teachers, where at a primary school, 1 or 2 teachers are selected. They're trained up to be a train the trainer, if you like. It's a close analogy. And they support across the school that they're employed in other teachers, so that we get the spillover benefits of their specialist knowledge. So things are being done. Is it enough? No. But there's a willingness and a recognition that we need to do much better.
And I would have almost answered that question word for word in the same way that Amanda has, and we often think alike, but it does require multiple points of intervention. I was in the museum during school holidays last Friday and just saw the excitement, amazement and wonderment on the faces of those kids, and thought, how do we make sure that if they maintain that, how do we bottle it exactly for the rest of their lives? At CSIRO, we have a really strong education and outreach program. We reach about 160,000 students every year. ATSI does amazing work with the Stellar kits that we send out to schools, where you can build a miniature IoT-enabled solar house, for example. So how do we support teachers to really encourage them to adopt new materials that will inspire students who have different learning styles? And then, my role is looking at that next generation of early career and mid-career researchers. How can we nurture, support them? We're busy designing the experience that they'll have when they join CSIRO at the moment, and making sure that they're mentored outside of the field, that they have access to the leaders in the organisation, that they have access to the training and professional development that they need. And then talking to Rob at the beginning of the evening, we have a moment in time where science communication is actually cutting through in the media. That hasn't happened before in my lifetime. And we need to grab that with both hands and make the most of it. And we need to celebrate science communicators. Now, in the scientific community, there's a little bit of a tendency to say you're either good at communicating or you're an exceptional scientist. You can't possibly be both. We need to break that down and celebrate our scientists. And as we do our sports stars, as we do our tennis players, as we do, our cricketers, we need to make sure that we change that view of society, that we're celebrating scientists, engineers, and technologists, because they're going to solve the problems that we're facing and create a better world for us.
We need them. We've got 2 more questions which we're going to take. Sorry, Rob. One from Zoom. We have a question from Sid coming up as well. So we'll go to Zoom first. Catriona. Sorry, where was another?
Yeah.
At the end there. Okay. I'll just test our panelist energies at the moment. Do you mind if we take a few more questions? Yep. Okay, we'll get to all of you. Let's go to Zoom.
Thank you. This is a question from Paul, asking all 3 of you to give us your thoughts on the progress of industry and academia taking up research and development in Australia, especially in the manufacturing sector. And sort of a second part to that is how do we get the message across to SMEs, the importance of lifting their commitment to research and development?
Excellent. Who wants to take a shot at that one?
Well,
So
I've just had a couple of conversations in the last 2 weeks, for example, with the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, SMEs, about how we can collaborate. Similarly with Victorian Farmers Federation, frankly, how can the membership of the society provide a scientific basis for your decision making, and the same to the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And I think that's very important. I mean, I think it's a really interesting link. One of the businesses that I'm involved in a few things I'm very fascinated with the circular economy. So there's one working at bringing technology from Italy that will effectively separate materials from end-of-life solar panels, so the materials can be recycled, and that hopefully then those processing units will be then manufactured here. Another one, I'm working with a group that's developed a bit of software around food waste recovery with the CRC for food waste at RMIT, and they've been fantastic. So that's a spin-off. That's a really good collaboration with the tertiary sector, developing a smart bit of software. I mean, I think food waste, if it were a nation, would be the 4th biggest emitter in the world or something like that. So we seriously have to work on it. Sounds kind of, oh, okay, it's not very smart, what food waste, but it's fundamentally important. So I think that's a really good example. I think that's happening. And I think those are the sort of conversations I think you can take to the community and say, this is where the value of science is in the new world.
does that answer the questions? Yep. Okay. Did anyone want to take a shot at that? Or
Yeah, and look, I'll just add, I think it's a work in progress. So over the last, umpteen decades, we've been trying to improve that interface between industry and academia and make it more dynamic, equilibrium type enzymatic reaction, if I can use a biochemical analogy. But and we see some great examples. Is it part of our culture? Not yet. And some great examples for us to look at, for example, the Fraunhofer in Germany. So it can be done, and so we remain hopeful of making further change.
So I'll just add 2 things. One of them is that CSIRO facilitates SME Connect, which doesn't mean we always work with those SMEs, but we connect them to the relevant people in the research community who they can work with, and we help make that process happen. And that's reached over 35,000 SMEs, I believe. The other thing, to Amanda's point, it's the Australian ecosystem is different, and it's evolving and it's changing. And I look at Germany. I spent a lot of time over there, or did when we could. And I also look at the US, and I see leading researchers who are deeply embedded with industry, are producing graduates who are then going out into industry and then coming back and funding research. So there's a much higher awareness of the value of scientific research in those societies. And I think that's coming in Australia.
Yeah. Sid, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, first of all, I should preface that thanks for sending the question to Zoom before I could ask my question, because we're talking about STEM and high school students, and I could talk all day about it and mentoring our students. I know, but I want to bring the question back to the creating a world-leading manufacturing sector in Victoria. And if you look at the work that Veena Sehajwala is doing in New South Wales with the green steel, and the micro factories, do we think that the future of manufacturing in Victoria or in Australia in general is going to be micro factories? Or are we going to see the return of big factories manufacturing a lot of high volume products? Or are we going to see lots of micro factories coming up? We're a very entrepreneurial nation. So do you think that's where the future is heading for manufacturing?
I love that question.
I love that question too. I think that is what we are beginning to see. And the thing that enables microfactories is digitalization and being able to cost effectively manufacture at those low volumes for niche markets. So that's been the thing that has enabled manufacturing back on shore. And I look at, in Germany, there's the Adidas Speed factory, which are making shoes, making bespoke shoes using their highly digitalized factory. That has reshored shoe manufacturing to Germany for the first time since forever. So I think there will be the rise of those micro factories, and there'll be the distributed network of them.
Yes. I often think about hospitals, all of the plastic waste that comes out from your medical grade waste, and to have that micro factory in the basement of a hospital, just put it straight back in as syringes or what have you. Terrific stuff. Sameen, we'll go to you next. And
I hate to tell you how many high quality plastic breath testing straws Victoria Police go through every year that are thrown away.
Exactly. Yeah. Each industry could have their own microfactory and just keep closing the loop. Go ahead.
Sumit Walia from RMIT Engineering. Thanks, Bronwyn, for the presentation. Just a quick question about the priority areas that you mentioned, where there were materials and quantum technologies and medical technologies. Now, all of those areas obviously are high value areas where we should be investing our efforts in. My question is more about the interfaces of those areas, because a lot of the significant breakthroughs that will come about will be actually at the cross section of those areas. So we might have those parallel streams running, but are there any strategies in place to actually make people communicate across those areas and come up with that real value innovation?
So I guess I'll speak to you a little bit about the model we use at CSIRO, which is that the business units are the heart of our organisation, and they're at the coalface, really working on development of new technologies with industry. They're really at what we would call Horizon 1. Horizon 2 are the missions, which are focused a bit further down the track on bigger challenges. And then finally, Horizon 3 is the future science platforms. Now, the business units are very much focused on a particular sector. We've got energy, we've got manufacturing. The missions are bring scientists from across the organisation together on a purpose-driven industrial problem, like a hydrogen mission, which just got launched working with industry, but a bit further down the track. And then our future science platforms bring together people from across different disciplines, different areas, different business units to work on something that's really high risk, and we encourage them to fail. And one of the great delights in my new job has been hearing those stories of failures from our scientists, people who've tried things and said, you know what, this failed and here's why, and here's what I learned. Or we started out on this path and then we completely changed the model. And we've now got a completely different future science platform, and openly sharing those, bearing their chests and sharing those stories so that everyone can learn from that. And it normalizes failure, because in order to succeed, you have to fail.
Part of the scientific process. I'm going to go to Rob next. Just down here, please, Sid. Also, I'm just checking out YouTube as well, just to see if we've got any comments. I have a picture of a chicken, which Fury, the king of the wild horses, has posted for us, and I hope you're all happy. And is there anything else via Zoom at all? Okay, so let's make this the last question, I think, unless there's any other burning ones. Put your hand up now, or forever hold your peace. Rob, go ahead.
I'll try to explain this as clearly as I can. I'm an ecologist and come up through the university system, and over a long period of time working with various industries and so on, I've noticed that the profit motive drives a particular kind of research. And obviously we're focusing today on manufacturing, and that's really where that comes from. But the kind of technology that we need is not only the sort of technology that industries need for their own profits, but it's also for public good. And as I see it, there are lots of ways in which our economy could be shaped in such a way as to create demand for those public goods so that we could encourage the development of technology that helps us to do things like environmental monitoring. Management of fisheries was one area I was particularly involved in. Those sorts of things tend to fall behind because they don't attract the same sort of focused technology development because the profits are not necessarily there. And so I'm interested in where and how you see us actually developing the technology through to favour public good and allowing that part of our future to also be supported.
Well, it's something that's really core to CSIRO's mission because we're here to serve Australia, and protecting, you will have seen one of the challenges that we're really focused on is protecting our environment. We understand how important that is just for the sustainability of our nation, but in addition to that, we can see the intersection of these different areas. So we have one of the largest collections of algae in Tasmania. And when the V2 Food burger guys were trying to create something that was blood red, that was organic and non-animal based, they went to the algae collection and found a particular strain of algae that could be used to, correct. So there's all these unexpected benefits from that strong investment in fundamental research. It's so critical, and we're very much focused on national benefit.
I might make a quick, I immediately thought of one of the other shifts that's happened in the last 5-6 years has been the emergence through Mike Bloomberg and Mark Carney of the Task Force on Climate-related Financial Disclosure, and now the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosure, so that we had 48% of the attendees at the Glasgow Climate Summit were private sector investors. The finance sector has understood that we have these two parallel existential crises, and they've identified, and unfortunately our media in Australia reports this very little, the $1.7 trillion was identified in private capital to invest in biodiversity, and something like $27 trillion of private capital to invest in mitigation of climate change. I think that that's been a transformation, that the finance sector now understands the need to invest in the sort of things that you're talking about, Rob, the things that are, common heritage demand kind and, for the common good. And I think that Australia needs to really focus on how do we get our hands on some of that money.
Even talking about, that's an excellent point, Rob, but even bringing it back to, the advanced manufacturing sort of space, even talking about waste or efficiency. Even in mining, Rob, which often has such a catastrophic impact on the natural world. The fact that some of the technologies you were showing us, Bronwyn, are basically minimising the amount of impact that the mining industry has, and presumably by using the same sort of technologies in the manufacturing sector, minimising the amount of waste that we create. Through cast-offs or cut-offs, because we're basically just using every single atom that we need to use, which is quite remarkable in itself. But I can see certainly that doesn't have immediate application in the field, but it certainly, I think, minimises the output. Sorry, I haven't got a microphone to you, Rob. We have to do that, otherwise no one will hear.
The finance that Rob Gell is talking about is where I see that we need to go. We need to actually find ways where that sort of finance actually ends up developing technologies that allow us to use it.
It's not a profit motive in it; it's more of a sustainability motive. Yeah,
it's a frontline, first level sustainability. I mean, the finance sector is basically saying, unless we reinvest in biodiversity, we will not have a thriving economy without a thriving environment.
Absolutely, yeah. On that cheerful note, okay, let's have one more question, then we'll wrap it up.
So, on the other end of the spectrum, what can we do to improve that collaboration between the lab and commercialization of things with industry?
Yes.
And how can CSIRO, for example, collaborate more with startups, with entrepreneurs, and how public funds like Breakthrough Victoria could also support that?
So we're doing that in a number of ways, but it's just one part of what is a vibrant ecosystem in Australia. Most of the universities have their own innovation precinct now, or their own startup ecosystem, and we're doing that through Main Sequence Ventures, which is wonderful because it really captures early stage research and partners that early stage research with an end user. So that end user requirement is always there in the front of mind. The on program is phenomenal. I think also just the culture has changed, where there's much more openness to working together than there ever has been. And in my time at CSIRO, I'm absolutely committed to making the most of that, and what we can do that is core to our values at CSIRO, which is going further together.
Yeah, I'm happy to have a go at answering that. Okay. So again, multiple points of intervention. I mean, fundamentally, I think by all means, we should support the mobilisation of intellectual property out of our universities, either into startups or in licensing with other companies. So that technology push. Equally, we need to find ways for market pull and to enable companies to share with researchers the problems that they're trying to solve, and seek to drive, if you like, research to some extent at least, to design solutions, because researchers are freer in their thinking and got that diversity. So we need to do both of those things. Then and I'll come to Breakthrough in a minute, the other area that where particularly government can have a role is in driving procurement. And so in Victoria, we've got a big commitment to purchase rolling stock. And so I've been working with our rolling stock team to, in our local procurement policy and in the tenders for that rolling stock.
That's trains,
trams and buses.
Yeah.
So innovation is an eligible criteria, and the responders to those tenders were measured on that, because we've got real problems on our well, I shouldn't say that. We've got opportunities for technological improvement on our rolling stock. So how can we reduce the weight of our trams so they can be more energy efficient in a grid where we've got the largest network of trams in the world? And so how can we solve problems there? And so we've been engaging with universities to and researchers to work with the providers of that rolling stock to try and design those solutions. So there are things that we can do. So with Breakthrough, Breakthrough Victoria was established just last year. We're in the process of, implementing Breakthrough. And again, more information will become available, but as I've indicated, it's both about the technology push, but market pull, because it's an economic development initiative. It is an initiative that it will be seeking to make a return for the state, both in terms of dollars, but also in terms of economic impact. So watch this space, and over the next 6 to 12 months, I think you'll see more being clear. Well, we've already made a couple of announcements just recently, including supporting university commercialisation, and that goes to the technology push. And we're very keen on the market pull, as I said. So more will come forward as in due course.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for your questions on Zoom as well. Thank you very much. It's been an excellent discussion. I'd like to now ask, as is our tradition, for a vote of thanks to be moved by Professor Matthew Cuthbertson, who is the Provost Chancellor of Research Commercialisation at Swinburne University and a Fellow of ATSE. Matthew.
Well, thank you, Mark. Well, a vote of thanks. I mean, there are a few people and things to thank here, but I think I really should start with the people in the room who come out on the cold night in Melbourne to come and listen to a fantastic series of talks and thoughts and inspiring ideas. So thank you for coming. For everyone who's participated online, again, thank you for your engagement and your participation. And thank you, Mike, for driving us through the process. So to the panel ourselves, I think when you look at the three people in front of us tonight, you can see a couple of things. One is you can see that all of them have this amazing command of their topic and a huge amount of knowledge. But the thing above that for me is you can really see the passion and commitment that all three of them have exemplified, which is very, I don't know, heartening and reassuring to me to say that, or to see that. So sort of one at a time. Rob, when I see, a sagacious title like President Royal Society, it's really encouraging to get up and say, I'm an entrepreneur and I really care about changing things and I love the Sex Pistols and I'm going to transform this fantastic facility and get it out in the community. So that was great to hear. And Amanda, likewise, for someone at the core of government to get up and say, well, you can't really ever know anything about, know everything about a particular problem. You've got to go and find a friend and find someone to collaborate with. And I think you've seen that these two key people in leadership positions and the way they clearly work together for all of us. So again, I was very encouraged to see that. So Bronwyn, where do I start? I think Bronwyn, you have, I couldn't believe the number of plugs you got in the talk. And you dodged the question about politics very, very beautifully. So I think a couple of examples for us there, but more seriously, I think Bronwyn's explained a few things to us this evening. One is, I guess she always comes back to the fact that research and innovation is a people business. It's about people and value and passion and developing those skills and celebrating those skills and passing them on to a next generation and the one beyond that. So you never lost sight of people, which was great to see. And you also talked a lot about partnerships. And I really like the flavor you put on. I mean, partnerships are about working with people you can trust and organizations you can trust, but it's also really about working with data and information that you can trust and how we're using technology to help us with that. And Bronwyn, you also showed us a sort of bewildering array of amazing technologies and capability that exists in Victoria, all of which can contribute to this world-class manufacturing future. But I guess your enthusiasm and knowledge of all of those things, but your vision of how one can help over here and how you can put all the pieces together, and it's not about one discipline or one idea or one magic thing that's going to solve it. The way that you are able to put all these things together, I think was a really good message for all of us to take away. So in terms of messages, I really like, Bronwyn, that your sort of final message or your encapsulating message about your philosophy on materials, use them smarter, use them less, and use them longer. And I thought that was just a really nice modern expression of a very valuable idea. But you also reminded us right at the beginning that there's a much more ancient philosophy of only take what we need, which I think as human beings and as citizens of the world is something we should all take to heart. But all of you, you're only taking what you need, but you're putting back a hell of a lot. So thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. And I think we thank everyone in the normal way. Thank you.
That's excellent. I'm having the last word, but that is the end of the meeting. So thank you, Matthew, as well. And Matthew really did bring tonight's proceedings together. So thanks, Matthew. All of the effort that you put into that is fantastic. I think we'll say goodbye to Zoom and to YouTube now. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. Everyone who's here in person, come downstairs, have something to eat and drink. And catch up with each other. Probably haven't seen these faces for a very long time or at all. So we'll get to know somebody new tonight. Thank you.